Alright, welcome everybody to another week of Game Wisdom Live. This is going to be for the week of October 19th, 2017. As always, join me, my co-host and streamer, Robert Leach.
How you guys doing?
Hey Rob, how are you doing this week?
I'm well. Things are going okay. How about on your end?
Things are going alright. We're about to hit, I think, 2,400 subscribers on the YouTube channel, so that is
Nice.
great. And I finally finished up the Dark Souls 3 Let's Play. It's
Awesome.
finally in the books. I can finally uninstall that game for a little bit. Hey, El Gordo, thanks for coming on. So, for
Hello.
those of you watching, I just want to start with saying that because next Thursday is going to be the last Thursday for the month, for any Patreon subscribers who would like to ask us questions for a Q&A, please submit them over on the Patreon side by leaving a comment, because that will be currently available. And of course, for any VIP subscribers who haven't voted yet for this week's grab bag, definitely get going on that. There should be a link, or I send it out to anyone who's donated at least $5 or more. And also, with the month almost over, we're still $9 away from hitting our $100 goal of a Games of Ill Repute analysis for November. So again, we're close. Can we actually hit it? So any help with spreading the word would be great. Actually, also as another update, next week I'm going to be doing another library presentation talking about speedrunning, which is going to be very cool. I'm hoping that they want to have me back. They said, at least this system, that they're going to be good until at least the spring. It seems like they're not scheduling anything for the winter time, unfortunately. So here's hoping things will pick up somewhere else. But with that said, there's definitely a lot of weird and interesting news to talk about this week, as well as some of the games that we've been playing. So I guess for you, Rob, anything new that you've been checking out?
I have been checking out one. I'm probably gonna buy it tonight. I'm hoping. It's Cogmind. It's the thing that catches me about it. Not only is it a roguelike, but it is ASCII based, which is they made it into a true like work of art, based on the videos and playthroughs that I've seen of people. It really looks amazing, and I recommend people look at it at the very least. And I'm going to be putting I think it's on 10% off right now, so it's $18 or maybe 19. Hold on, let me see. 17.99. So yeah, I'm gonna check it out tonight for sure.
I did a spotlight of it the other day on the stream. If you had a
Ah,
chance to look at that too.
I will have to. I totally missed that.
Yeah, it was just basically me fumbling around trying to figure out what things did, and then getting blown up at least I think 5 or 10 times. I think it may be a little too old school for me, but
Oh yeah,
I think if you're a fan of that kind of style, it definitely hits it to a T.
yeah. It looks amazing to
Mm-hmm.
me. To me, it looks amazing to me.
I think I was putting El Gordo to sleep when I was streaming it the other day as
Yeah.
well. Anything else you've been checking out?
No, just kind of keeping things in my mind. Still working on that game that I showed off on the Discord a while back. So hope to get that another step forward in the next couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm. I've been still working on my ebook. I'm now up to I think entry 13 or 14 of the 20 games, so it's
Nice.
getting there. I'm past halfway, so at least we're moving along that front.
Yeah.
Let's see. I know there's a whole lot of things to keep track of there. I think he may be talking about Cogmine too. And there's also a lot of games I have a chance to take a look at. For tonight's game stream, after we're done talking, I have, I think, at least two, maybe three different games that I want to do a first look live on. So the first one is this roguelike called Freaky Awesome, which is basically like the Binding of Isaac by way of the Toxic Avenger, if you know
Wow.
that movie from Troma. Um, the other one is what was it? Hob? I think that's what it was called. The latest game from the Torchlight developers.
Yeah.
And then I just got a press key because apparently I'm a masochist to Opus Magnum, which is the latest puzzle game from Zachtronics, the makers of course, Infinite Factory, TIS 100, and most famously Space Chem. And each one of his games has caused me to go, I think, slightly more deranged than I was beforehand. And I just love every time I talk to him. I mention, so how many people actually like beat your games? Like maybe like 1%. Or like I think there was even a percentage of people who never even made it past the opening puzzle of his games.
Wow.
Which that is very telling. At least I could do that. I'm so happy. Oh, Elgar is saying leave Opus for the answer. You can avoid it fully. Yeah, that is definitely a game you gotta be in the really great mindset to play, or it's just going to drive you bonkers. Let's see. I was trying to get my hands on a key for Steam World Dig 2. I know we talked about the Steam World series last week. Put in for the Evil Within 2. Still waiting to hear on that. I did start if you haven't seen it yet, Rob, I started doing a live play of Evil Within 1 on the stream. And that's been going pretty well, at least for a whole lot of dying in the game. And apparently it's a lot harder than I remember. Let me see. Oh my goodness. I think I know why it's a lot harder than I remember. Apparently, I just checked my Steam list. I never beat the game on Nightmare difficulty, which is hard mode. I only played it on normal. So that explains why things are a lot harder than I remember it was. But I'm going to keep at it because, of course, I got to keep to my hardcore gamer cred, right?
Yeah. I left that behind a long time ago. When I do my streams, I do try to do like the hardest possible mode, but if I'm not feeling up to it, I'll just do casual. I'll just like, you know what, I just want to see the game. I just want to get all the items for easy.
Elgar is saying not being a fan of stealth. Yeah, that's the other thing. You have to be stealthy in some sections, and my style of stealth is just running right in front of the guy going, hey, look at me, look at me.
The way of the samurai.
Exactly.
Charge on forward.
Or now, because there's these things called flash bolts, are basically like flashbangs. All I do is like there's a crowd, shoot the flashbang, they're all of a sudden just like run up and do the stealth kill right in front of their faces. Which may actually have to be my only way of survival if I'm going to keep playing this game on the second hardest setting, because there is one even higher than that, where you die in one hit. And I'm not crazy enough to do one-hit kill modes in those kinds of games. Let's see. Oh yeah, I'm not doing that one, Elgar. That's just crazy. He's talking about the hardest difficulty as well. But we'll be definitely taking a look at least two of the games. We'll try and save Opus Magnum for last, and that should pretty much be the entire evening right there. And then, of course, getting back to the Evil Within next time. Hey, Chad, how are you doing? And we still have to... Chow and I do have to get together at some point to do the Patreon podcast as well, because he did donate to that tier. And William, thanks for joining us as well. Well, we got a few people in the chat tonight, so that's great. I know last time we went long just because there were so many discussions we were having. Let's see. Oh, another game that I've been playing, I've been trying to get through Etrian Odyssey 5 to write my review of it, and things have been going slow there because, again, I like to play on hard mode, so it's even harder on the expert difficulty. I'm right now at the end of the first stratum, or the first set of floors, so I have the boss there to deal with, which hopefully I can get done with a little bit more level grinding, because apparently there's a whole new subsystem of the game that they have for Etrian Odyssey 5 that it would make sense to get to before I try to write a review of the game.
Yeah. We should talk about grinding at some point. We might have mentioned it before, but I feel like that's a longer term topic.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's always interesting about the different kinds of, I guess, grinding. How some of it just robs you of playing the game, while other times it's seen as, the badge of honor or the requirement for it. I guess for you, Rob, when does the grinding go too far?
I would say as soon as it diminishes your return on investment. Basically, at a certain point, you've grinded or ground. I don't know how to say it. So much that if the difficulty level of the next boss is too high and it's just forcing you to play and get like piddly percentages of your experience to the next level, then they've done something wrong. At some point, there might be a hidden item that's a low percentage, then they're forcing you to grind for that. Anytime they're forcing you to grind at a very low percentage of return, that's when it loses me.
Yeah. When it feels like there's only one way to go forward, and anything else you're doing is just wasting time. Seems to be the killer for me, and that is kind of true of the Etrian Odyssey series. Because it is old school dungeon crawling RPG, leveling is it. And the gear that you can buy is tied to what enemies you kill. So if you've killed every enemy in that floor, well, you're not going to find any new weapons or any new ways of improving. So what do you have to do? You have to go level up and up and up. And I think the series, if there's one big fault I have, is that it doesn't do, I think, a good enough job of explaining your options in terms of how to get around that. And I'll give you two examples. In starting from Etrian Odyssey, I think it was either 4 or the remakes they did for the 3DS, they gave you new abilities that are tied to essentially like a burst gauge that fills as you do damage to enemies. And each character gets like a super skill that they can do. So the healer could get an ability that lets them immediately heal the entire party. Or the warrior gets a skill that does an instant stun on the boss. And the game never really referenced, actually went out of its way to say, hey, these skills are really powerful, you should make use of them. And it was just such a mind-blowing event when I started using that in Etrian Odyssey 1 and then the 2 remake, that it just completely changed the game. And they're doing something similar with Etrian Odyssey 5, that now you have these team union skills. Like, these are basically super skills that require different numbers of party members based on the skill. So one skill basically blocks any attack for that round of combat, and it requires 3 characters to use it. Or another skill gives you full heals, but could require 4 of your 5 party members. And it's the same thing, that it doesn't really explain to the player just how vitally important they are. And hi, Ether, thanks for coming on. And then what they actually did in Etrian Odyssey 5, which I found very interesting, is you can now level up your weapons. They actually have a way of every weapon you buy can be strengthened. It costs you no money, but you use resources that you sell at the shop. And it's just basically a way of taking a weapon and boosting it further. I thought that was actually a really great touch, because it's essentially a second way of leveling up your weapons. Now, you can't do it with armor, although I'm still, not even a quarter of the way done the game, so maybe that will open up eventually. But it's still one of those ways of, again, getting around the fact that if you're stuck, there's no other way to get through it. It's kind of the same thing that drove, I know, a lot of people away from the Darkest Dungeon, and how much grinding is really required when you're trying to do the final set of dungeons.
Yeah, the thing you had mentioned though about the being able to level up your weapons and armor, because they have they allow for that in Torchlight as well. It makes you really determine, like, strongly whether you want to stick with a particular weapon or not, because you're invested in it all of a sudden. You've poured resources into it, so to run across another weapon that's already higher than even the stuff you invested in, it feels like you've wasted. So it's another balancing aspect that I feel like when you get it right, that's a very cool thing to add to a game.
Yeah, you always have to be really careful with those kinds of upgrade systems, especially in a game when the upgrades are pretty much going to be life or death. And as an interesting, I guess, segue for a second, that's what I'm running into with The Evil Within. Did you ever play The Evil Within, Rob?
I have not, no.
Well, what they do is you have a complete upgrade system for your weapons, your actual inventory, as well as the character himself. So they basically break it down to just about every aspect can be upgraded, from your health to how far you can run to how many bullets you can hold at a time. And it's one of those games where when you start out, it is painfully difficult. And of course, let's talk about the fact that I'm playing on Nightmare difficulty as well for a second. But once you start upgrading, it becomes a completely different game. And I'm sure for those of you who are watching the Evil Within plays, which I should start cutting up in a few days for the recorded folk, you're going to see that change. Like, I spent a good hour and a half, 2 hours on the very second chapter of the game, just because I was struggling so much due to how little damage I was doing, how few weapons I had. And then once you start getting those weapons, it's just basically like everything breaks open. It's that kind of that same issue we see in action horror games, where you're scared at the beginning, but then when you have a railgun, machine gun, rocket launcher, and sniper rifle, what's really going to frighten you when you're walking down the hallways.
Yeah.
I guess getting back to the topic of grinding, as we've said before, when it comes to like free-to-play games, that kind of grinding is really integrated into their design. Like,
Yeah, it really is.
and I think that will also be a perfect segue into some news in the next few minutes. For instance, I told you I was playing the game Idle Heroes on Android, and right now I'm at the point where I literally cannot make any progress unless I get a 6-star hero, or the ultimate version of that guy. But to do that, I need to collect lower class heroes to then fuse into that hero. Or wait, better part, I have to collect lower heroes to fuse into another hero to then use that hero as fusion material for the guy that I want originally. And then, of course, I have to spend resources to level that one up.
Yeah.
And there's just no way around it, because again, it is just raw abstraction. It doesn't matter what I do when everything is just stat-wise too high for me. And it's just where that grinding really comes into play.
Even something like Candy Crush has a grind element. You get to a certain level and you cannot beat it. Like you either get super lucky and you can beat it through some kind of cascade chain, or you kind of buy in. Even if you're not using money, you buy a couple of those items, or use a couple items that you gained along the way to kind of bump yourself up. And even then, it's not a guarantee. So they really do. They even Candy Crush, which has just hundreds of levels, if not thousands by now, and that's enough. But there's so many players that are keeping up with that they have to integrate a little bit of artificial suppression on your moving forward.
Yep. And of course it's done because it's an effective way to get people motivated to spend money. Or of course, as we talked about before, with the gacha design. And hey, you're stuck here, but if you can, maybe you'll get a 5-star hero in the next roll, then you'll be able to get through it. And repeat, and of course it's not just one hero, because then you need to level 2, and you need a whole party. And then I even tried the Final Fantasy game. They have a gacha Final Fantasy game that has you level up your gear, and then there's skills within the gear. It was just.
I was very disappointed at that game coming out. I mean, there's nothing against having a free-to-play game, but when Final Fantasy, if it's a different one that I'm thinking of, it's more like a Clash of Clans kind of style, where you build up your area and go to feed other people's like towns and whatnot. Or
I think this may be a different one. There's a Final Fantasy 15 mobile game, and there's also like a Final Fantasy Classic mobile game as well.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and I did not play the Final Fantasy 15 one, but I think that's the one that you're probably thinking of. Oh, and El Gordo just mentioned, of course, Dungeon Keeper, and that. I think that's one that broke Jim Sterling, because I remember seeing his video on that a few years ago. But yeah, Dungeon Keeper was just like you had to like click a block, and then it takes like 5 to 6 hours to dig out that block. Oh man, of course, Goddess too is another really good example. That's the Peter Molyneux game that it just like failed because they were trying to turn it into a mobile game without telling anyone that. But yeah, that's another one of those great train wrecks we should examine at some point.
Yeah, I want to double check if I have Goddess or not. I think I do.
Bought it, but I got it because I had credit from Green Man Gaming, so it only cost me like $1. But even then, I think that was too much for that game.
Oh no, it's just on my wish list. I feel like
Lucky
I played
you.
It, though. This looks so familiar. I feel like I played it and was absolutely disappointed by it.
Could have been. It's very hard to tell. And apparently I have Goddess Wars, which is the multiplayer game that they gave everyone to free after the first one failed, which in 2016 the designer of that left or was fired from 22 Cans, so now there's no release date for that one. So it just keeps going on and on.
Yeah.
Why you wish to play Goddess? It wasn't a wish. I was hoping that it would have turned out better, and that was long before all the nightmares happened. Let's see. Getting back to grinding, I guess, like I said, like I guess here's a question for you and for you folks in chat. What are some examples of games where do you think they got creative with the grinding, as in a way of either hiding it or doing its best to remove the grind in any way, shape, or form? Could be like having multiple ways of gaining experience, multiple forms of progression, or even something like Diablo with just literally scaling everything to your level.
Boy, that's a tough one. Boy, I have to think about that one. Oh, jeez.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that drove, while you're thinking about that, it kind of drove me crazy when I was trying to play Persona 5 earlier this year. Because there were a few bosses that literally my strategy to fight that guy didn't change, but because I got like 5 or 6 more levels, the fight went from being near impossible to being a cakewalk. And that to me really just drives me crazy in RPGs when it comes down to just simple leveling up. And
Yeah.
I was trying to think of a really good example of that. Oh,
Now, you
jeez.
can go a little bit abstract and just go with really difficult games have their own form of grinding, and that's just to get better and memorize patterns and such, which is, not exactly grinding, but it's not exactly not grinding.
Algordo was mentioning Warframe, and at some point I need to get around to playing that. And I'm sure on that day Elgor will be jumping for joy because he'll be able to tell me all the things about it. Oh man, that is perfect timing. You see the comment in chat? Oh man.
That is funny.
Maybe if we say, maybe we can summon Sid Meier if we just mention Civilization enough times. Yeah, but yeah, it's. I think you made a really good point there, Rob, about difficulty in games. 1 second, I'm going to just block the the ad there. There we go. Okay, and with that said, well, now I just lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, with skill playing as a grind, it's very interesting because different people have different opinions of that. I've seen people just utterly rage out games like Dark Souls, Bloodborne, of course, Cuphead, and for me, it never really bothered me. Like, to give you an example, in Bloodborne, the hardest battle of that game, or one of the best ones, was considered the Ludwig fight. That was part of the DLC. It took me, I think, about 12 or 15 deaths to actually beat that guy on my first try. And it never got to that point of being overwhelmingly, I want to throw my controller against the wall. The same for Cuphead. But I think it may also have to do with different preferences or, I guess, your mood or how you feel about that stuff. Because for Cuphead, like, I'm always really good at games that require you to like learn those situations and adapt to them. I think that's kind of why I took really well to that game. I was watching people, I was watching various streamers and YouTubers play Cuphead, and they were stuck at bosses for like an hour and a half, 2 hours. I'm just sitting there going, what the hell is going on here? Like, I don't think I've spent. I think the most I spent on a boss, and that was like the one night, that 3.5 hour play, was maybe 15 minutes on one boss fight, and that was it. And so it was just crazy for me to see that.
Yeah, I'm just going to call it skill grinding. We're going to develop a new term here. This skill grinding, just playing over and over again until you increase your own personal skill. There are a couple of things that popped into mind here. One, I mean, it's a little different. Sims. Now, when you play The Sims, you can grind. You basically take your character and grind them in whatever profession they have, so that they level up, and then you can make a lot of money with them. That's me as a gamer manipulating this simulation game for my own. That's just how I understood it. Now, the other one I was thinking of is Dota or League of Legends. You're like forced to do grinding, but there's so much pressure on what you're doing at any given time that even though you have to do grinding, you have to multitask and do other things at the same time. So you're basically going in and out of grinding in very different manners throughout the whole game. in order to either gain experience so you can get a level and get an ability, or gain gold so you can go back and buy a key item to help your team. It's that pressure that forces you to really balance that out as much as possible.
Yeah.
Of course, watching those guys play, you never know that it was a grind at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's those are a couple of different ways of, I suppose, getting around it. Sims, I didn't make the full point, is that in similar fashion, you have a variety of different things to pay attention to. One character you might be grinding with, but the others are all doing other things. So it's not a grind. It's you're fulfilled in other capacities, even though one aspect of your game might be in grinding repetitively.
And of course, and the pressure of avoiding the toxic clouds as well from League of Legends. Yes. One thing I was saying about, I was reading a post on Polygon about Destiny 2 and how they have like day events, or they have like special events on specific days of the week, like kind of a way of focusing your reward or focusing your progression for that day. So maybe, and I don't play Destiny 2, so for anyone watching, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of like on Tuesday, I have someone sneezing in the other room if you heard that. You have like on Tuesday, like raid day, and that's a day that raids may give you a extra bonus. And then maybe on Thursday, doing a mission or completing a set of missions gets you X. Kind of reminds you of what they did with Payday 2, and they used to have what was it? Oh yeah, they have now like daily and monthly challenges in Payday 2 that earn you bonus money, bonus experience, ways of basically saying you can play the game normally, but if you do this, this, and this, you'll get a little bit more.
Yeah, it's strange when you meta the whole grind aspect into other areas. Then there's the whole thing, the twist on roguelikes, where grinding in terms of playing over and over again gets you new characters and new abilities,
new persistent elements. Yeah, the Binding of Isaac, and even this game, Freaky Awesome, is definitely built on those kinds of persistent elements. But there's always that challenge, I think, of just how much do you lock behind those elements. Like, if I'm a brand new player, can I beat your game without unlocking X, Y, and Z? Or is the entire game balanced around unlocking those things? Because I think that always drives me a little crazy around roguelikes and such that do that, where you can start the game, but unless you unlock, your level 5 sword or this specific upgrade, you have no way of beating the game. The game is just simply not balanced for like starting gear or starting tier. But as you said, it's the difference between having that kind of skill grind. Like a lot of roguelikes is about you figuring out, okay, if I put the coin in the fountain, I'll gain a bonus health potion. If I use a health potion here, it will gain me superpowers, and so on. Like, that's you learning the rules of the game, rather than the game just arbitrarily telling you, oh, you didn't unlock this, you're done. You can't do anything more until you accomplish that feat.
Yeah. Another creative way of that is a Metroidvania type game, which would reuse the same room over and over and over again, but in different ways. So you have to pass through the same place, but because you have this tool you got in Area A, you can now get to Area C, but you're still going through that same asset, that same room.
Oh, yeah. And I think I talked about that in my piece on Metroidvania earlier this week, how the game just changes as you get those upgrades. As you said, you may go through the room one time, you have to be like at the bottom floor, slowly jumping across moving platforms, and then you come back with like the double jump or like a dash, and you just completely bypass that whole section like it was nothing.
Yeah. I wonder, it just occurs to me, maybe that's why Metroid did what it did, is so they could have a certain amount of assets and not break the game in terms of memory, but allow you to like multiply that by 4 or 5, because of you have to keep going through the same places over and over again, but in with a different perspective on each one.
Yeah, and I'm sure we can certainly talk more about grinding. We could probably come back to this topic next week as well. I guess here's some very weird news. Did you hear that the developer Kitfox Games announced a new game today?
I did not.
This is a doozy. Let me get the exact name of it. 1 second. Where is it? Come on, I just saw it. Here it is. It's called Boyfriend Dungeon. And I'm sure with that name, you're probably really excited to hear about what the rest of the game is about.
I mean, I can only imagine. Of course, it could go any number of directions, but there's a couple in particular that just kind of blow my mind.
It's a roguelike where apparently you go into procedurally generated dungeons to find weapons, and it turns out all the weapons are actually very hot men and women that you can date. I'm not making this one up, folks. I am certainly not making this one up.
That is so funny. That's kind of brilliant, I think. That is kind of brilliant.
And I'm sure there are many, many ways that things can go further from there. But yeah, that is apparently, it's going to be launched sometime in 2019. So they still have a few years to go on that. They've also announced updates for the Shrouded Isle, which is like their sort of like a narrative cultist simulator, which I looked at earlier this year on.
A what simulator?
Cultists. You're managing a cult in like an adventure, saying it's like who lives and who dies.
Oh, okay. I heard colt. Sorry, like a horse.
Lord, dating women can damage your lower parts, but them just right there. Yeah, so that's gonna be an interesting one. Oh, good. Either it can't wait for the spotlight. That's gonna be a while, to say the least. Speaking about doing spotlights and such, one thing I want to touch on is, since we last spoke, I did my podcast with Paul Ritchie and Fred Ford from Toys for Bob on the history of Star Control 2, as well as they're going to be making a spiritual sequel to that since they don't own the name to it anymore. And that was an amazing podcast, because I grew up playing Star Control 2 back, I think it came out in 1992, I believe, for the PC. I didn't play it till the 3DO version. So it was amazing to pick their brain about kind of how things have gone. We didn't get a chance to talk about the Toys to Life genre, but I would love to have them back on for another cast regarding that.
Yeah, that'd be very cool. I really need to catch up on the last week of your casts.
Yep, and I did the Dissecting Design on Star Control 2 this past week, too. So that was a fun one. I'm thinking about maybe making that a Patreon goal for next month, to do a Let's Play of that game. Because I would love to do that game. I just don't have the time to sit and play it with everything else going on.
Yeah, I hear that.
Let me see. There's anything else news-wise before we get to some of the juicy stuff? I think that's it for me. Did anything else before we get to the two things that kind of popped up this week?
I don't have anything in particular. No, just the various esports tournaments that have been going on. So I've been enjoying those.
Cool. All right. So with that said, we have two very weird topics, or somewhat interesting topics that came up, and this will probably take us to the hour, maybe even more so. So the first one is sadly the closing of Visceral Games. They are, of course, the makers of Dead Space, Battlefield Hardline, and even I did my video, they also did Dante's Inferno. And we were talking about it just before the cast, that there's a very weird post on Gamasutra, and we've been seeing a lot of people talk about this on Twitter, saying that because the studio's closing, that means the death of single-player games in the market, or single-player AAA games. And that is a very weird one. So, Rob, what did you think about that?
It is. It's a very weird statement to make. I feel like it's one of those just attention-grabbing statements, just to get you a clickbait, as it were.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of a ridiculous thing to say. Now, that's not to say that AAA. When I think AAA, I pretty much jump straight to console. And I know a huge amount of attention on console, it just pours straight into multiplayer, whether it be something like Call of Duty or Madden or any of those, or Street Fighter, any of those kinds of games, which because of online play you can do, are purely like multiplayer. Now, when you go to Nintendo, I feel like they're still embracing that AAA single player experience, even though they might be branching out into a lot of other things. But you can pretty much say, okay, the next Zelda is going to be something I can play on my own or with a couple of friends, or the next Mario, same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like, you know that those are going to be stable, and RPGs in general are going to be stable, except especially turn-based, party-based. So I don't see them going away. Certainly some genres might be going away, or at least on their way out, but I feel like we've already established what genres they are, and we're moving forward in other areas, and coming like those are going to be like single player. I don't see that as going away. You have people like me who love single player, who don't necessarily play a lot of multiplayer, certainly don't seek it out. So I mean, if they're going to abandon me like that, I'm going to go in the corner and cry.
Yeah. And I mean, every few years it seems like we get these articles about something's going to die. PC gaming was going to die. Horror games are going to die. The MMO market was going to die. Now, the piece, or what a lot of people are talking about, of course, is the fact that the news out is that they're planning on restructuring the Star Wars game from Visceral into a more complete experience. Now, what that means, we don't know for sure, but a lot of people feel it's code word for multiplayer. And it's kind of one of those weird things, because we have certainly seen a shift, and we talked about this last week with monetization and microtransactions, that it seems that the AAA industry is really getting behind using that as an auxiliary source of income for their games. So if the game isn't really meant for it, or really can be designed around it, are they going to want to support it? And that's, I think, where a lot of people are kind of thinking about with this topic.
Yeah. It reminds me of those game building simulators we touched on last week. That's always what happens, is it progresses from 1980 when you start to, like, multiplayer is something you basically have to have in your game to make money by the year 2000 or 2010. It just feels like that's how people think, and that is one of the reasons I don't like those game development house simulation genre. It's that particular mode of thinking that it has to go that particular way. Like you say, the loot crate, the loot boxes, and multiplayer, all these little things, that buzzwords, what it comes down to, that you have to have, or else you're not going to make it in this world.
Yeah. And, like, speaking of which, we saw, like, every few years the industry trends around those specific genres or designs. I mean, anyone who grew up in the 90s played a platformer at some point, just like everyone in the early thousands played a third-person open-world game. And then over the last few years, online multiplayer. Yeah, and there was something about Dead Space 3. And there's also discussions about just how much money was being put into those games. In terms of, and we've talked about this before, the difference between raw graphical power versus a very stylized or unique aesthetic. It's why the many indie games have done really well in terms of, I guess, future-proofing themselves. Because a game like Stardew Valley, it's not going to age as badly as something like, Call of Duty. Just pick one from, like, the last 5 years ago. And but they're still spending tons and tons of money trying to hit that point of, perfect realism, when I don't think a lot of games need it or really warrant it. I'll give you an example. When I showed my mom, like, a few years ago, I was showing her, like, Super Mario Galaxy, Super Mario Galaxy 2, like the HD on my TV. I mean, she was floored by how well that game looked. And, like, games like that still hold up today, because they're not trying to approach realism. They're going for something that is uniquely them.
Yeah, it always blows my mind a little bit. You have this tremendously powerful medium of video games, and you can do anything you want with them. But it seems like a giant percentage of the population wants it to just be exactly like reality, except just a different type of person, whether it be an athlete or a soldier or something along those lines. Everything is exactly the same. You just get to play the role of something that you might have wanted to in real life, or just might be interested in. But yeah, this hyper-realism thing kind of makes me crazy, because why not just go crazy? Why not be just nuts with it? Old arcade games were basically forced to be abstract based on the limitations of the hardware. Thank God they didn't start out with this massive hardware, because then maybe everything would have been just this hyper-realistic.
Yeah. I mean, to give you a good example, someone was showing me screenshots from Steam World Dig 2 earlier on Twitter, and that game looks amazing. And again, it is completely, as far removed from realism as one game can get. And I'm sure they didn't spend anywhere near as much money doing that as probably Visceral did for Dead Space 3, or even something like Capcom did for Resident Evil 7.
Yeah.
And as El Gordo said in chat, there's a lot of people who equate graphics to making the game good. And we've talked about it before, that perception of AAA development. That what is a AAA game? Well, for a lot of people, it has to have multiplayer. It has to have at least, if it's a single player game, it must have at least 8 to 10 hours of content. And of course, it has to look amazing. It's got to push those graphics. But do graphics really make a game? And I'm sure everyone who's watching us, and I'm sure you as well, Rob, probably will argue against that.
Yeah. I remember I was at Steve Dev Days last year, and I wish I could remember offhand who it was, but I'm pretty sure it was one of the top guys at Unreal, who was claiming that they were pushing for this hyper realism thing because that was the way games were going. And to me, I just thought to myself in the audience, is like, why are games going in that direction? I'm fine with some games. I like the fact that some games really push the boundaries of technology. I like that. That's the way we move forward.
Yeah.
But why just group them all together, that all games have to be hyper realistic? Like, I mean, I hate to go back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, Cogmind. It's like, I look at that, I'm like, oh my god, the graphics are amazing.
Or something something like me with Cuphead.
Yeah, Cuphead, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people I was showing that game to. I was like, can't you see how brilliant this is? This is amazing. And people would just be like, okay, it's like a cartoon. I get it. Like, no. Okay.
Or earlier this year, we did... Yeah. Or when I played More Fight earlier this year, did you see any footage of me doing that game?
Which one?
More Fight.
No.
It's kind of like supposed to be like a 80s like synth kind of style kind of game. It's very hard to describe. It's a lot of people say it's like No Man's Sky done correctly for a lot of them. And that game may be like my dark horse candidate in terms of the game that's completely shocked me in terms of how much I liked it. And at some point, I need to get back to playing that one.
Yeah, I'm just turning it up now.
Yeah, as Alera is saying in chat, Morphi is a focused No Man's Sky. And again, and another advantage, of course, when you're going for style over graphics, it lets you get around the fact that you're not spending, millions of dollars on these hyper-realism, Unreal Engine. I don't even know what version we're up to now. Yeah. But you can do a lot with less. I mean, hell, look at Undertale. Undertale is not going to be pushing anyone's graphics cards anytime soon, but that game has certainly earned a following for its very unique characters. And you can't really... I'm sure you could do something like that. Oh, I just got a horrible image in my mind, like hyper-realistic Undertale characters. I'm not going to be able to unsee that anytime soon. But it will just look differently. Now, of course, some games, I think, the detail really does make it pop. Like, when I looked at Resident Evil 7, it looks like I'm actually in this living room or this house. That's amazing. Or, I guess here's a question for you. Do you consider BioShock Infinite to be an example of graphical power or aesthetics?
See, that is a tough question. Yeah. I feel like that is a really, really solid question because there's no reason they are mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
When you have games that have a terrific aesthetic, they can be driven by really powerful graphics. Like, I'm trying to remember like some killer example, but you can easily let's just take No Man's Sky, for example. Not necessarily pushing the boundaries of graphics, it's pushing the boundaries in other areas, but like whatever you consider about the game, I won't buy it because of the negative reviews. I feel like it's foolish, but its aesthetic is amazing. Like, it looks incredible, and there's no reason you can't have an aesthetic that's amazing that also pushes the boundaries of graphic detail, whether it be in reflection and refraction, or whether it just be in whatever brilliance you have in your brain that really hasn't been able to be done before because graphics limitations.
Yeah. Or something like Horizon Zero Dawn from earlier this year. Or, oh no, it was in my head and then I lost it. There's another example I wanted to bring up, but yeah, like something like there are examples of those games. I agree with you, Rob, that it it may not go for realism, but it goes for something so impressive that you can't really imagine this being done with maybe like an indie developer's budget. Like,
Yeah.
I guess a good example would be something like Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, or even what I mentioned earlier with Super Mario Galaxy.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of time and work, and money, of course, that goes in making those games pop like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you have brilliant artists like that
Hmm.
who are able to extend their creativity and
Oh,
not
yeah.
be forced into just reality, well, I mean, maybe people who really like to do realism, but like, I'm a big fan of abstraction in any sense, and I
Hmm.
feel like abstraction can really push boundaries of you know the hardware. I just happen to like you know old school looking stuff.
Hmm. I just thought of a really good example of like style over graphics. Here's a game that I'm not sure anyone here has actually played, or I'm going to test you too, Rob. Have you ever
Oh
heard of
boy,
the game El Shaddai Ascension of the Metatron?
no,
Okay,
no, I will not surprise you today.
that is this crazy game for the PS3 where I still don't even know the story. It's like it's definitely based on religion, if I remember right, but you're based. I mean, I'm having trouble explaining it. You're exploring essentially this form of heaven where it's represented by a tower, and each tower basically is its own interpretation of heaven. So one is like this beautiful landscape, another one is like this pleasure palace, another one is like a future sci-fi city, and everything just has a completely different art style to it as you're exploring. It is just an insane game to play. I still don't even know entirely what to make of it, and I beat it, I think, once or twice. But if you have a chance, definitely Google images of it just to see how insane this game is.
You might have to type the title into
Yeah,
chat or
it's not
something.
exactly the easiest title to. Let me grab it here. 1 second. There we go. I don't think it ever came to the PC, and I don't think it will anytime soon.
Shame.
Yeah, but that is a kooky one for sure. Oh, I just saw another good example. Something like Persona 5. The
Yeah.
whole pop art style to that game is amazing. But again, that's definitely something you couldn't do on a very small budget, especially how expressive it all is.
Yeah. I do believe, and I'm not 100% sure where El Shaddai is made,
Hmm.
but I think that is what Japanese developers have
Yeah.
historically been good at, is this abstraction to the point of just being incredibly aesthetically
Hmm.
pleasing, whether it be in animation
Hmm.
or in video games. They have a sense of abstraction that it seems like the Westerners,
Hmm.
especially in America, do not like. We're the ones who seem to push realism,
Hmm.
which to me is like, it's boring to me. But I do think that in
Hmm.
Japan and perhaps Korea as well, yeah, they really do. They seem to be more creative, if that's the
Hmm.
way you want to say it. But um,
Hmm.
yeah.
And
Oh, that's yeah,
Sada's
that's good.
mentioning Fury, which is another good example. Final, 13. I was about to say Final Fantasy 13. I remember there was
Yeah,
a game called 13. That
yeah.
was another one. Oh, or of course, one of my all-time favorites, the Katamari Damacy series.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Oh yeah, I
Oh my
have
gosh, I
I have
love
on
that.
YouTube like just like the playlist of everyone uploading those songs that I will just play, whenever I'm bored or if I'm trying to work, but then I start singing the songs out loud,
Yeah,
which makes it very hard to work.
yeah. One of the few soundtracks for a game I own.
Mm-hmm.
Neverending Nightmares. That's a good one.
Which one is that?
You basically keep waking up in different rooms and going until you die, and then waking up again, or stuff like that. It's that one is fun.
It
It's fun.
sounds familiar. Oh
It's
yeah,
like a pencil drawn kind of thing, if I recall
yeah.
correctly. It feels that way, anyways.
Huh. And apparently I own it too. So, what do you know about that? Yeah, but yeah, yeah. I mean, we have definitely seen some examples, of some very expressive games. And yeah, I think that's a very interesting point, Rob. That we see a lot of the stuff out of something like Japan. Like it's always weird, like the Dark Souls series. Like, on one hand, it looks like it's realistic. Like, these look like actual places you could visit. But then on the other hand, it's just complete surrealism. I mean,
Yeah.
Bloodborne itself is just pure nightmare fuel.
Yeah, and I feel that way about oh god, it was just in my head and I lost it. So never mind. Never mind what I was gonna say.
Hmm. I know, I'm not the only one who's done that, thankfully, at least
Yeah.
tonight. But bringing this back to single player games, I would agree with you that I don't think single player games are dying anytime soon. But of course, the question remains: like, are we going to see more integrations of monetization and microtransactions? Stuff like what we saw with Shadows of War. Uh, what was the other one? What was the other one that just came out? Not Destiny. Oh man, what did I forget?
Not Forza or something.
Could have been Forza. I thought there was something else big that came out lately that had. I know. Oh, I maybe think of Battlefront 2 as well on
Yeah.
that one. But yeah, like it's always very tough again to predict these industry trends. I think for like a lot of people that as long as it's making money, they're going to try and pursue it in one way or way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I feel like every once in a while, and
Hmm.
uh, it happens that there's a particular thing.
Hmm.
Excuse me. That there's a particular thing that marketing
Hmm.
departments in video games
Hmm.
suddenly surge and push a very specific feature, whether it be multiplayer or, like you say, loot boxes and all that stuff. And inevitably, it crashes and burns. Like, inevitably. As soon as you have a marketing push that drives the design of
Hmm.
a game, you're going to crash. People are going to recognize it as false and fake and stapled on, and they're going to just, shrug it off. It's like when you see, this is the part that always kills me. This particular story always kills me. Super Mario Brothers 2. For some reason, they didn't want to make a unique game. Someone pushed them into having a sequel and just stapling new art on there and calling them Mario and Luigi and Toad and
Hmm.
Princess Peach. Like, that to me is a marketing decision, not a game design decision.
Hmm.
Um,
I
when you
always.
see the loot boxes, it's a
Hmm.
marketing decision. When you see multiplayer forced in some games that should be single player, like, that kind of stuff is rarely like a designer going, you know what this game needs?
Hmm.
We need to ruin the balance and put something else in. Like that's I feel like it's just going to crash and burn soon, and we just
Yeah.
need to wait it out.
Yeah, like I've always go back to my go-to example, the Spec Ops, the line developer, calling multiplayer in the game a cancerous tumor on the disc there. With the Mario Brothers one, I heard that it was because they felt it was too difficult, the original Super Mario Brothers 2, and that's why they decided to take another game and port it over or recondition it. But
But
it's
I
always
feel
one.
like that is a to me that
Yeah,
sounds like a marketing decision.
yeah.
Like, oh, it's too hard. Well, so I mean, it's
Hmm.
Mario. It was super successful. Why are we
Hmm.
going to change the complete aesthetic of the game and the
Hmm.
music and all that stuff? Don't get me wrong, I liked it. I
Yeah,
liked
me
Mario
too.
2. I love the music to that game.
Hmm.
But it just is it's a whiplash kind of thing. Like 1 and then 2 and then
Hmm.
3 goes back to 1. So you're like, "Okay, that was weird."
Every like Nintendo game back then seemed to have the sequel being just completely insane. Like everyone remembers Castlevania Simon's Quest. Metal Gear had the bad sequel, which then forced Hideo Kojima to make the good sequel. Legend of Zelda, the second game had like RPG elements to it,
Yeah.
so it was always weird like that. And as you said, it's always like these different trends that are evolving and trying to push things one way or the other. Like I said earlier, we saw with the open world genre, then the first person shooter genre. And then when Uncharted got popular, everyone went to third person shooters. So it's always, or our go to one, the MMO genre. There was that time when everyone wanted to make an MMO, and then what happened? Just about everyone crashed except for Blizzard.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Like like you say, the MMO thing.
Hmm.
You don't it's a lack of understanding of what that genre is about,
Hmm.
and it's about player retention. Not like World of Warcraft had all the players, and to pull those players away from all the time they invested is not going to happen. So it's just an uphill battle. So I don't know why these decisions come out of nowhere, and I feel like that's where marketing comes in. And I have a bit of a grudge against marketing, so you'll have to you'll have to bear with me when I start going off about it. But like, yeah, I do feel like there's a decision that's made somewhere that is not embraced by the game designers, and it just kind of gets pushed in, and everyone just has to shrug and grin and bear it, and yeah, it just gets stapled into game history of things not to do.
Yeah, and speaking about marketing, that actually takes me to the next point I wanted to bring up. One of the other reasons, or one of the other things we hear out of these AAA studios, is the amount of money that goes into marketing, advertising the game, in many cases exceeding the budget of actually developing the game.
Yeah, and marketing is so expensive.
And that's always that very interesting and polarizing part about these games. Because as we said, like going back to Dead Space 3, there was that infamous post from EA saying that the game didn't earn $5 to $10 million, it wasn't going to be considered profitable enough to keep going. And I was just saying, like, it's never going to make that amount. You're not going to make a survival horror game that's going to earn, money on par with stuff like Halo and Gears of War and so on.
Yeah.
And it's always that challenge again of what actually goes into a video game budget. And exactly, I'll go 50% is marketing, 40% graphics, and the rest is the game itself. And I think that's why.
Put that in quotes.
Yeah, I think that's also why a lot of people have really turned to the independent space. Because for a lot of these developers, it's very much like 0% goes to marketing. Everything goes into the game itself.
Yeah, I know all too well how hard marketing is in the indie space, and I feel like it's my conclusion after all of it is that it's marketing by just being yourself. There's no other way to approach it, in my mind. I mean, there are plenty of successful publishers out there in the indie space, but that's the way I see it, and that's why I feel like spending tons of money on marketing is just a waste a little bit.
Well, you still have to do some work on it, but
yes, you do. I call it leg work as opposed to money work.
Yeah, but as you said, it's the difference between someone, investing like millions of dollars in an ad campaign, and then the other extreme, someone doing literally nothing until like the day before the game is released, and then making a post saying, "Hey, our game's coming out tomorrow. Come check us out."
Yeah, no, it's time or money, and indie developers have more time, and AAA developers have way more money. So I guess you do what you're good at.
Now, before we talk about the Activision thing, keeping with our AAA feel, there's another very interesting thing that came out this week about Assassin's Creed Origins. Did you hear that story?
No, I did not.
Apparently, GameStop released a flyer that literally says, "This bonus mission is locked unless you pre-order the game at GameStop."
Ugh.
And that drove a lot of people crazy there.
Well, it just seems, I don't believe that's the first time they've done that. I remember there was like back in the hard copy day. Well, hard copy is still hard copy in consoles, but like back in the day when there were no patches, you just had a disc. They did that a lot. I mean, that was kind of like the beginning of people hating those stores. But yeah, like that kind of content that you are forced to have to get via GameStop or Kickstarter or something like that. It's a little, it feels bad. It feels a little gross.
Yeah. And as I was talking about on the video, it gets even worse when you start having multiple retailers having multiple exclusive bonuses.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I know like a Deus Ex ran, not the second to last one, the one that just came out, Mankind Divided. They had their whole issue with having like locked content and trying to gamify pre-order bonuses.
Yeah, it's weird, especially in that buy it from multiple places thing, because then you're never going to get all the content, no matter what you do, and that's got to be frustrating.
And I am just looking right now about Assassin's Creed Origin. Oh my goodness! So there's a standard pack for $60, the deluxe pack for $70, the gold digital pack for $100, and then the gold steel book for $110.
Do they give you the gold with it?
No, but apparently, if you want Oh, so many missions and a special shield. Oh, and they actually, and this is one thing that drives me nuts. This is like with you in marketing, this is the one that makes me crazy. When developers or when publishers or whoever put in game changing or exclusive items that just break the balance of the game that they give to you right from the start. Like with Dead Space 2, for instance, because I got that game, I forget where I got from. It came with all the DLC stuff unlocked from the start. So I start playing the game and immediately I open up my inventory. I have like 15, 20 different weapons. I have no idea, how good they are, what their balance is. And it just throws the entire game's loop for a spin.
Yeah, it's I agree with El Gordo there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it has to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
It has to be. What I mean, for those of you who are watching this in the future, he says any bonus content on pre-order launch first months is just cut content, and I don't know what else, because you're not gonna to spend a lot of time. Game designers, and developers and producers already hate the fact that most of their content is not going to be seen by players, and let alone something like that where you're making content very specifically for people that doesn't even really go with the game. It is not balanced in the game, and not everyone's going to see it. People might even be bitter that they can't see it. So it's got to be cutting room floor, right? I don't know, but that's a good perspective point.
Yeah, like it's the difference between, say, working on DLC for 5 to 6 months out versus having it right away for day one.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of people are certainly not fans of any kind of day one microtransactions. Like the latest South Park game already has a season pass, as well as looks like some kind of bonus relics and stuff along those lines. Or you see games where in the pre-order bonus or specific editions, they'll start you out with bonus experience or bonus ability points or stuff like that. And that also just seems very wrong to me.
Yeah, it really does. Certainly, I don't mind if you have a piece of content that you just hold out and sell as an add-on later. I mean, that's whatever. You can do that as long as everyone has access, or an item that you just unlock to people that for availability right away. That is something you can achieve later in the game. I don't know. It's or something that just is completely flippant, like flippant. That's the wrong word. That's completely just surface. Like, oh, you get the game on a ruby colored disc or something crazy like that. I appreciate that kind of stuff. But yeah, when you're buying a game, you want the whole game. You're paying the same money as someone else. Just because you got it somewhere different shouldn't make any difference, right?
Yep, and it never really sits well, as we talked about before, when you're told you only own 95% of the content because you missed out on the pre-order. You're never going to get that.
Yeah.
Or they may sell it to you separate for $5 to $10.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I just shrug. I don't know what else to say about it. It's kind of gross, I guess. Yeah.
Yep, and here's something that's very, very interesting. I'm just looking at this on Etrian Odyssey 5, and speaking about trends, the Etrian Odyssey series now has DLC for it, for a single-player dungeon crawling game. So oh my goodness, they're actually going to charge you like $2 to bring classes from the other Etrian Odyssey games into Etrian Odyssey 5. Oh my goodness, that just sounds crazy to me. And again, and I think for a lot of older gamers, what drives them crazy, a lot of the stuff was free back in the day. You would get this over, months as, a special thank you, or fold it into an expansion. But now it just seems like it's just being doled out on these like little drips and drabs, forcing you to spend more money.
Yeah. I remember when consoles used to come with games. I mean, they do now, but you have to pay extra for it somehow.
But yeah, it's always like weird about that when you see single player games have this kind of additional content. Like one thing that drives me another thing that drives me loopy is when you see single player games that have bonus costume DLC. Like, why would I want that for a single player game that no one will ever see this other than
Yeah.
me?
Yeah, that's
Or the
ridiculous.
horse armor in Skyrim. Like, it's a single player game. What are you getting for that?
Screenshots, of
Mm-hmm.
course.
Yeah. One of these days I have to play one of the DBZ games. I know they're doing a new fighting game, the one from the Blaze Blue developers, which I'm sure I'll be as good in that one as I am in Street Fighter V, which is pretty horrible. So we'll see if I ever get my hands on that one. Uh, but yeah, like I know a lot of people really. I guess here's a question because I haven't followed this too much, but what has been the overall reception of Injustice 2? Because Injustice 2 is famously or infamously known for having a whole lot in terms of loot box and costumes and DLC and stuff like that.
Well, I am going to have to bow to that particular conversation. AAA again is
Mm-hmm.
not my cup of tea lately. So, Injustice 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, okay.
Oh man, so they actually have. Oh, this is great. Apparently, they're not going. Not only are they going to add Hellboy into the game, but they're going to add Spawn. Uh, I know they add in. Oh my goodness, so many like random characters. But yeah, as Agora was saying in chat, like the Arc System, whatever their name is, who makes Blaze Blue and Hyper Fighter or Fighter Z, they are now famous for having some very in-depth fighting games.
I can appreciate that. A lot of detail in any kind of game, especially a niche game, I feel like that is to be embraced.
Mm-hmm. Arc System Works. Thank you, Alberto. Is that game coming out to the PC? I wonder. Let's see. I don't think it is. Yeah, I see all the Xenoverse and that kind of thing, so it may just be console only for right now. But we have been seeing more fighting games on the PC, which is really nice.
Yeah, I wonder if it's esports that's driving that a little bit.
Hmm.
I know
Oh, it is coming
esports
to
is
the PC.
another one of those buzzword things that people are starting to get into.
Oh,
Um,
they have been getting into that since like the early thousands with StarCraft. I remember EA pushing heavily for the esports crowd with Command and Conquer series.
I just feel like when you start to see all these fighting games and you start to see
Mm-hmm.
multiple versions, the problem I've always had with Dota and League of Legends and even Heroes of the Storm
Mm-hmm.
is that when you really look at the maps, they really all have the same kind of concept behind them. And to me, that's like, well, why is there always a three lanes? Why is that a thing? Why
Mm-hmm.
does that matter? And that's a question I always get is like, I understand that one game goes with this and they balance it, and even a second game might go up a lot of the same things. But once a third game comes along and copies that same kind of, doesn't invent or use their own mechanics,
Mm-hmm.
at least in from a base standpoint, I just shrug.
Yeah.
Like, why?
And apparently, the new Dragon Ball fighting game is going to come out on my birthday, February 1st. So that'll be interesting. Maybe I can get that as a birthday present or something.
Nice.
And then that'll be my present to myself, getting killed online for 5 to 10 hours that day. Let me see. Getting back to the topic regarding like Assassin's Creed Pure Bones, and then we'll move on to our final part. Um, yeah, it's always like we've been talking about this for years now, with trying to move away from pre-order bonuses or trying to find some other way to entice people to buy games early, and it doesn't seem like the industry is coming up with a better solution. Because as we've seen, it's becoming less and less valuable to pre-order a game for day one. I mean, here's a perfect example: that Agents of Mayhem game from the developers of Saints Row. It was on sale, I think, last week or the week before that for $20. It hasn't been out for more than 3 months and it's already been discounted that far. And or Doom 2016, I bought it when it was like $36, down from 60, and went down to like $20 by the end of the year. Now, of course, people say, you're going to buy it early to play it first, but there's just so many games coming out. And Olga was saying in chat, like, DLCs now, loot boxes are taking over for DLC, which it could entirely be so.
Well, I know that pre-ordering these days means different than it used to be. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you went to GameStop
Mm-hmm.
on opening day without having pre-ordered it, it might be out. Well, these days, a lot of games are just downloadable. So it's infinite. You can buy it day one and download it. There's really no reason to pre-order if you have that availability,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly if you're a PC player, like pre-ordering it gives you a copy of the game in most cases. So pre-order it, you can just play right then. It's not exactly
Mm-hmm.
pre-ordering from a traditional standpoint.
Yeah. And again, like for a lot of the older games, pre-ordering was the only way to know what the interest level was. But today, it's become a lot different. Like it feels like, and maybe this is just me, that it feels like the better offer, what we're seeing more, is having discounts. For instance, Green Man Gaming, every time there's a major AAA game that comes out, like 3 to 4 weeks before that game comes out, they'll offer it for a special like 15 to 20% off rate right up until the day of release. As a way of again trying to entice you by saying, well, if $50 is too much, maybe get it for 35 or 40. I mean, that's how I bought the XCOM and War of the Chosen expansion. I think I got it for maybe like $35, $36 or whatever it was. Then like 15, 20% off that way. And that just, to me, seems like a more attractive option. Because it's not something that punishes someone for day one. It more or less rewards them. And then eventually everyone will get access to the DLC and the season pass. That will all end up in the wash.
Yeah, the other benefit to getting a percentage discount is um, when you're like dealing with GameStop, you can sell it back and actually
Mm-hmm.
feel like you didn't lose too much money.
Yeah. But with that said, we are over an hour at this point,
Yeah.
and we do need to get.
Yeah.
I do have to do my regular streaming in a little because we have some games to look at. So I guess here's our last topic, and this kind of I guess is some what we talked about last week regarding loot boxes and microtransactions. But it was revealed this week that a patent Activision filed for in 2015 recently cleared for ways of basically more effective ways of monetizing or trying to get people to buy microtransactions. So the patent detail ways of manipulating the system of matchmaking to say that to put people who haven't spent money up against people who did spend money. To basically force them to say, oh, you are playing against this guy and he's so much better, so if you want to catch up, go open up a loot box or spend $2.99. And in the light of stuff like Shadows of War and Battlefront 2, you can tell that gamers took to that news with very calm and peaceful discussions.
Yeah. Um, Anytime you get something like a patent
Mm-hmm.
that is attached to a video game in any way, that is going to cause an outcry.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in the case like this, where they're obviously trying to manipulate people into buying something just because they're trying to keep up with the Joneses.
Mm-hmm.
That's every time everyone knows that that kind of stuff kind of happens, but when you see it right in front of you, when someone like Activision, a power player, just like shoves it in your face, like, look, we're trying to manipulate you to make money. That's a little insulting. Like, we already know you're trying to manipulate us a little bit when you're marketing to make money by adding stuff in, by releasing the same game every year. We already know that. But when you are actively pursuing a way to make money off of people, and because it's a patent, make money off that patent if anyone else uses that particular way. So
Yeah.
it's just greed times 10. It's
Yeah.
ugh.
And it completely throws the balance of those games out the window. Because we were
Yeah.
talking about this on the Discord channel that you're not supposed to be pairing people who spend money with those that don't. Because I think it's going to more or less piss off people like that. It's the same thing like I always feel in any idle or free to play game. The second I start to see the man behind the curtain of how they're trying to get you to spend money, it just drives me away. But I know with that said though, very few people are going to buy microtransactions to directly support the developer. I know that's a nice goal to have, but for a lot of people, as you said, it's more about keeping up with the Joneses. If so and so has this really cool looking skin, well, I want that. Or he has that amazing weapon, why can't I use that?
Yeah, and we had touched on this in the Discord with Josh, other Josh, Ultimate Josh, um, where and this is against, because El Gordo, what you say is absolutely correct in what they're doing, but I know most skill games, when you're talking about PvP, generally speaking, for money, they go out of their way, and even just PvP these days, but they go out of their way to make sure you're playing against someone of similar skill, because otherwise, especially in money-making games, the skilled players are just going to just wreck anyone who's younger, less experienced, or even less skilled, and jump to the top of the rankings. And that is so important amongst those kind of groups. And now this is exactly the opposite. So like, just like you say, they're giving people who paid money, they're legitimately giving them an edge times 10. Whereas the people who haven't spent money, they're just stomping on them and saying, "Hey, man, if you want to play this game at all, spend money."
Yeah, and like we talked about that with For Honor, and how it took I think several years in order for someone to get access to everything if they didn't spend money. And this is on a $60 game purchase as well. That's what also drives people crazy. And going back to Injustice 2, what's the field of the third Josh? That was a Josh we had on who does streaming. I think he was on last week, or he was in the chat. He was the last week or the week before then. I'm not sure what he does though for a living. We'll have to ask him at some point. But like with Injustice 2, they have a mode, like they allow you to have all those items, but the ranked mode, you have to turn them off. Like you cannot play the game ranked if you're going to have those items on. And again, like as you said, it feels very skeezy like that. Now, of course, Activision came out and said, we haven't implemented that in any of our games yet. But once you put that thought in people's heads, it becomes very hard. It goes back to what we talk about with probability in video games, where if the game tells you have an 80% chance to hit and you miss twice in a row, people are going to assume your game is cheating. The whole XCOM and Darkest Dungeon mythos right there.
Yeah, in those regards, I feel like most gamers are intelligent enough to know that, well, maybe I should try it 10 or 20 more times and make sure that the percentages actually weigh out. But it's easy to look at something and say, you know what, they're screwing with me, and just because they haven't implemented it, they went through an awful lot of trouble, hired an awful lot of lawyers and people to think about it
to get it patented. Yep.
And if they came out and said, no, we patented it so that no one can use it, no, that's unlikely. That's unlikely.
Yeah, I don't think Activision did that for altruism there. Well, that would be a very funny turnaround for that story.
That would be.
Oh, that's a good suggestion, Gordo. For, going forward for the Patreon, anyone whose name is Josh will pay discount for them. That would be perfect. If you can prove your name is Josh, you get a $2 off any tier. But wait, then if I do the dollar tier, then I'm owing Josh's $1 there. I'm owing them money. That will be very counterproductive there.
Gotta go for percentage off.
Exactly. 30% off anyone named Josh. There you go. Let me see if there's anything else regarding the patent. And of course, there's still no discussions over what games this will be attributed to. But it sounds like, with the fact that they're trying to put people together to show off or to dominate, that it's going to be games where there is going to be gameplay or game-affecting content locked behind either microtransactions, loot boxes, or both.
Yeah.
Let's see. I know, we are just about 1 hour and 20, and we even have a break or a pre-stream. So I think it is time to wrap things up for tonight. And again, we can certainly talk about this next week.
Or on the Discord.
Oh, yeah. And again, for you folks watching this, if you would like to join us on the Discord, it's only a $1 donation over on patreon.com/GWBicer. Again, $5 gets you VIP status for grab bag voting, Patreon goals, whatever. And of course, like I said at the start, we are only $9 away from hitting our first $100 goal for the Games of Ill Repute analysis. So Again, you have a few weeks, or I think like 2 weeks left for October. Next week, again, if you are donating on Patreon and have any questions for Rob and I, we will certainly take questions posted to us on the Patreon. And we'll have to have our talk about horror design next week as well.
Wanted to brush up.
Yeah, I need to see if I can grab Bill Gardner again, the developer behind Perception, see if he would like to talk with us about it, but we'll see what happens. So again, Rob, thank you so much for being my co-host tonight. Again, if you'd like to catch Rob for his streams, he is on. Is your channel still Indie Voyage Rob, or have you changed that?
It is, but I might be porting over to RNG Gods TV. Shout out to the RNG Gods. They are a group of people who are a group of streamers that I am with these days. So I might be pointing people over to that station, as it were, or that channel. One of these days soon, yeah.
And what is your schedule for people watching?
Saturday and Sunday at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. GMT. But yeah, that's what I do, 2 to 6, generally 4 hours at a time, and then popping in and out during the week, every now and again.
Okay. And for myself, if you're watching this live right now, I will be back probably in 20 minutes for a night of first looks here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel. If you're watching this recorded, those pieces should be cut up and shown over the next few days. Also, if you're watching this on Friday, I'll be posting the last episode of my Dark Souls 3 play. And then I'll be starting to cut up the Evil Within plays going forward. And for this week's podcast, I think this is the one with Abbey Light, the publishers behind Logo Malitos game, so Super Hydora, Curse Castalia, and so on. I'll have to double check that, but that will be a really great cast. But with that said, we are going to end things here for tonight. So we'll be back live next Thursday around 9:30 EST, and of course you'll be seeing more videos from me here, probably throughout the day or throughout the week. So until our next stream, have a great night, folks, and we'll see you all then.